Good afternoon once again, Facebook. It is Todd Chance from the Fox 17 Morning Mix with another Morning Mix Social. And today, oh my goodness, you've heard the hype. Okay. You've been hearing the hype for forever about 5G. 5G is going to change your life, right? What is 5G? Why isn't it here yet? We've been hearing about it for so long. How is it going to change your life? What carrier should you? I mean, we have so many questions, and that's why you shouldn't be talking to me. You should be talking to this guy. It is George from Resonant Inc. We're going to bring him in just a second. There he is. Hey, George, how are you?
Good. How are you this morning?
I'm doing quite well. Confused because I've been told how my life is going to change for a year and a half. It seems like 5 years. You know, 5G has been heralded as this just amazing leap into the future, right? We've heard about how this is just going to change our lives, but we've been hearing about it for a long time, and it just doesn't seem to be happening like many of us maybe thought it was going to. So hopefully you and your work, what you do at Resonant, can help us figure out what 5G is. Okay, first off, and what all the hype's about. I mean, can you do that in a nutshell? What is 5G and why is it being hyped so much? I mean, from 2G to 3G to 4G, yeah, our phones got a little faster, but this is being, touted as life changing.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? And what people don't understand, we're living in the here and now, and most everybody thinks that these new technologies happen overnight. And the 2G to 3G to 4G transitions, those are 10 to 15 year transitional time periods. And we just expected they happen right then and there, but they
Sure.
don't. Basically what has to happen when you bring in a new technology to the network, one, the networks have to be ready, and then the devices have to be ready. And quite frankly, the network operators want us as users to be Johnny on the spot. So as soon as the network's ready, we can take advantage of it and they can bill for it. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's all about getting ready on both the consumer and on the network side. And once we're ready, taking advantage of the opportunity.
But George, the hype. I mean, obviously they want to sell phones, they want to sell carrier service, all those things. So 3G to 4G, there were commercials, right? But
Yeah.
these 5G commercials are making it seem like the Star Trek, I push the button and my food appears. I mean, it's like some crazy futuristic thing, right? So what is all that? Is that hype legit?
Well, as you sit back and look at it, this is a Star Trek moment, right? I mean, takes you're getting ready to get on an airplane. You want to download your latest movie, and you look at the countdown timer. It's 20 minutes on a 4G network for an HD movie. Here on 5G, 30 seconds. I don't know. That is real world nirvana for a guy like me who travels all the time. Probably
Right.
for you as well.
Right.
Making sure the kids have their latest and greatest cartoon. My goodness, make that airplane ride go faster. I think it is nirvana when we come back and we come to think about it. But from a user experience standpoint, obviously we think about what it means to us personally on our own mobile phone.
Right.
But 5G is a lot more than that, right? 5G is autonomous vehicles. It's the next generation of automation in factories. It is remote surgeries. It is virtual reality or near virtual reality on your mobile devices. It is very interesting things. And from a user experience, will be very meaningful. It's just going to take some time.
Yeah, obviously it already has, right? Taken some time. We've been seeing these commercials now for months and months and months talking about how 5G is going to be so great. You talked about all these other things, these autonomous cars, these remote surgeries. Why can't that be done on 4G? I mean, what's the big difference between 3G and 4G? We didn't hear about this great new thing, but from 4G to 5G and beyond, we're hearing about a whole new network.
Well, yeah, as with all new transitions, there are overlay networks that are built. I mean, as we sit back and look at it today, right? Your cell phone has 2G, 3G, 4G, 4G LTE. And now if you got the latest and greatest iPhone or Samsung Galaxy phone, it's got 5G. All of these technologies are present in your phone, and we're backward and forward compatible. I think the big thing that we're getting out of 5G ultimately is going to become greater bandwidth to the phone. I mean, if you sit back and look at kind of what happened, I mean, these handheld devices are really only 13 years old, right? 2007 was the iPhone. And, who would have thought that we were going to be watching movies in real time. That didn't happen, or real time video with your family and friends. That just wasn't expected back then. Today, it's an everyday occurrence. It's something we have to have, we have to live with. And making that experience better is what 5G is all about. It's getting greater bandwidth to the phone at higher frequencies, so higher speed.
You mentioned mobile and you mentioned the phone. Is 5G something that's going to affect home internet?
It's going to affect everything, right? I mean, as we sit back and look at kind of the latest and greatest auctions on the Wi-Fi front that are enabling Wi-Fi 6E, you're now talking about higher frequency Wi-Fi above the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz that it currently exists at. So it's these higher frequencies that gives us greater opportunity for wider bandwidth. Historically, as we looked at these markets, cellular handsets was the big market. Everybody wanted to win that, whether you're a PA or different types of component suppliers into the handset. That was the holy grail. Win a deal with Apple, win a deal with Samsung, or some of the Chinese manufacturers. But that's where everybody was focused. Now, with the advent of some of these newer and higher frequency in-home applications for higher speed Wi-Fi and higher frequency Wi-Fi, you're now seeing that application is about the same size as the mobile handsets when it comes to 5G. So these two things have to work together in order to give you that kind of ubiquitous experience. I mean, most of us today, depending on the devices that we have for our handset, move between Wi-Fi and cellular all the time. Every time we go into a building, we enable cellular, and we enable Wi-Fi calling. Why? Because we get better coverage in a building. Those things are getting even more intertwined as we see the advent of some of the new Wi-Fi technologies. And there's been massive amounts of money spent on these new frequencies. So I think it's going to provide just a better overall user experience and make things much more seamless.
Now I'm trying to get past the hyperbole of, T-Mobile and Sprint and Verizon and everyone else, talking about how they have such great coverage everywhere about 5G. How prevalent is 5G as it stands today? I mean, we're talking, it's got to be just major cities, right?
Well, it depends on whose network, right?
Okay.
I mean, obviously, if you're talking Verizon, it is in major cities. Millimeter wave technology is much more expensive to deploy. You got smaller cells. You're having much, greater density of cells. It's almost, from a deployment standpoint, almost looks like a mesh Wi-Fi network with the number of cells that you have to deploy, because these higher frequencies go shorter distances.
Okay.
So, you've got to be in, kind of high density applications like stadiums. I mean, and even then, depending on what your sight line is to the terminal, you might have great Wi-Fi coverage, great 5G millimeter wave coverage, or you might not. As you look at some of the other networks, the Sprint T-Mobile merger gave great nationwide coverage. That's why they're deploying probably the fastest. They got a great footprint. They own a great piece of spectrum, so they can go out and deploy this 5G network much more quickly. And AT&T just spent a ton of money on the C-band auction, so they're going to be moving much more quickly as well. At the end of the day, where we are in 5G today is we're really in that setting a footprint from a network operator perspective. Yeah, if you happen to be where there is a high density deployment of 5G terminals, then if you're on your cellular phone, you'll see 5G pop up, and you might have great coverage, or you might see it falling back to 4G LTE as well. I think we're a couple years away to get that full, rich user experience where every way we go, we're going to be on these high speed, high frequency networks.
I think you're mentioning something that I want to dumb it down for, folks like me. When you're talking about a cellular network, the 4G network that's out there, and how these 5G is kind of built on top of that, but it is delivered distinctively differently than 4G. You're talking about a lot of tinier, higher, frequencies at a much shorter distance compared to what 2, 3, and 4G looked like, versus how many of these, I don't know what you call them,
Base stations. right?
Yeah.
You're looking at the base stations for a
Yeah.
cellular network, right?
Yeah.
And the infrastructure providers, are deploying these base stations, depending on whether or not they're sub-6. Which, if you look at the two different types of 5G networks, you have below 6 gigahertz, and then you have the millimeter wave, which is the much higher frequency, applications for 5G. If you're in the high frequency, you got much shorter distances, so you're going to have a lot more base stations, where the sub-6 is more like a traditional cellular deployment from a distance perspective. But again, as you go up in frequency, you go smaller distances, which means you have higher power to get the same reach. It's a pretty, when it gets right down to it, yeah, we're talking a lot of technical mumbo jumbo when it gets right down to it. All we care as a mobile phone user is, hey, do I get connectivity? And ultimately, you're starting to look at, hey, what's meaningful to me? And for most of us, it really is, about download speeds, and are we able to get, whether it's files we're downloading if we're a business person, or if it's movies that we're downloading because we want to occupy time while we're traveling, or taking care of the kids. You want to have their gaming to be a good experience, so that they perhaps are less disruptive on where they're going. I mean, all of these real world applications for us as human beings will be a better user experience when full 5G is deployed.
Okay, I'm gonna cut you right there, because that's the win. Okay, that word right there that you mentioned, because honestly, I mean, they worked us up into a lather in 2020. Okay, even in 2019. I mean, they were laying this stuff on us in commercials, saying, "Look how amazing things are going to be." Here it is, months into 2021, and I haven't used 5G, but maybe once when I was in Chicago and went over to that network, right, when I took a trip. So how long is it going to take for peak performance? Until it works perfectly, and that nirvana that you're talking about, that everybody who has that 5G enabled phone can just get it wherever they are?
It's a great question. And, it is a lot of speculation, obviously, around it. We look at it, and when we're talking, whether we're doing webinars to educate people on kind of the overall application set for 5G, or talking to investors, and they're all asking the same question, right? Everybody 2 years ago, as I did as well, I was in a big panic that maybe we were late, and I run a company that actually delivers technology to make this happen. 2 years ago at Christmas time, we are seeing all the 5G commercials from Verizon, AT&T. I still have that vivid image of, the ambulance going down the road on a T-Mobile. I think it was a Verizon commercial. Ambulance going down the road, and they're talking to the doctor in real time, helping this patient. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's happening today. Are we behind? And my guys are all going, hold the phone. That is talking about what can happen and what will happen. Where we are today is kind of in the early stages. Back then, we were in the hype cycle, getting everybody wound up and ready to go buy the new devices. Where we find ourselves, and we kind of like to talk about it in kind of 3 waves of deployment.
Okay.
We're kind of in that first wave where you see innovators and early adopters setting a footprint. And when I say setting a footprint, it's not only from a network operator perspective, all the work that we see going on by the T-Mobiles and Sprints, the Verizons, the AT&Ts, they're out there setting a footprint, building the networks that enable this technology. You said you were in Chicago and you had 5G come up on your phone. You were probably in a Verizon location that had millimeter wave deployed. They've got a lot of density in that city. But if you'd gone out to Schaumburg or gone out, outside the city, you would have been back on a 4G LTE network pretty quickly, or you would have been working on Wi-Fi if you were in building. So the technologies have to get deployed first. That's where the big money comes. That's why we saw $81 billion spent by the network operators to go buy spectrum, largest ever, right?
Wow.
That happened on the C-band auctions just a couple months ago. And, as we sit back and look at what this is going to mean, ultimately, we will get the networks deployed, but it's going to take a couple of years. And then there's devices, right? I mean, we're looking at, there's a Samsung device out, there's an Apple device out, there's some Chinese manufacturers capability. And what the limited capability is because the components in those devices just can't do the work necessary to deliver that full-featured user experience that we expect, because these commercials have led us to believe everything is going to be ubiquitous. It's really easy to get excited. I was very
I
excited.
was too. I was like, this is going to be great. And now it's a year and a half
Look
later.
at Amazon. Amazon's going to be delivering packages to my home. You've got the in-home security systems with the drones flying around.
Right.
Can you imagine a drone flying around your house if it doesn't have, good latency in the components that are there? That thing's going to be hitting the wall or hitting you or hitting the kids. This is all based on the devices that are in these, these systems. Today, the devices just aren't there. Okay. When I talk about devices, it starts with things, what we do, which is filters. Filters are what enable this capability. And it's having filters that have good high frequency performance, great rejection at these high frequencies. And when I talk rejection, I'm like, doesn't interfere with your Wi-Fi network, doesn't interfere with, the other devices in your home. You've got to have great rejection. Those devices are coming. They'll be out in the marketplace end of this year, early next year. My guess is if we start to see us getting into that wave 2 of deployment, that's when higher capability devices get into the phones, higher capability devices get into the network equipment, greater deployment on a nationwide basis, because most of us care about the US only, but it's also on a worldwide basis that we have to look at these networks. Sure. And we're going to see, I think, that wave 2 start to hit kind of the end of this year, early part of next year, and continue through the 23-24 timeframe. And then we're going to start seeing real aggressive deployment at these higher frequencies for millimeter wave. We'll start seeing a lot more investment in that space as well. And that's where you're going to get the super bandwidth applications.
When you say millimeter, is millimeter wave and 5G synonymous when you say that?
Yeah, well, there's two different applications of 5G. 5G is a communication protocol that is delivered over certain frequency ranges. Millimeter wave is the very high frequency version of the application or implementation, and sub-6, which is what most of us talk about in the US, is between 3 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz, where the other 20 gigahertz range. Wow, so really today, if you look at what AT&T is doing, you look at T-Mobile and Sprint, they're very, very focused on sub-6, where Verizon's been more focused on millimeter wave. That comes in two different things. One, the hardware they're deploying, and two, the spectrum they own, right? Because each of the operators has to buy spectrum, and they have spectrum that they have purchased and that they have allocated to them, and they deploy devices around that spectrum.
I get it. So there's a spectrum out there, and there's a certain area of look at it as a highway, right? They've got their own lane. Somebody else has got their own lane.
That's a great description. And that's usually how when guys want to talk about the component level technologies, when what we do, the filters are these little fences that separate the lanes of the highway.
Okay.
Right. The first iPhones had less than a dozen filters in them. So there are less than a dozen highways coming in and out of the phone. And those highways include not only the cellular spectrum, the Wi-Fi spectrum, the GPS spectrum, the near field communication spectrum, the Bluetooth spectrum, all of these highways coming in and out of your phone. Now the number of highways has gone from less than a dozen to as much as 100 different highways going in and out of your phone today. That's going to continue to grow as we start seeing full MIMO implementations and start looking at as we get more of 5G technologies deployed in the phone. And ultimately what that means, greater bandwidth to you as a user, a greater user experience, whether it be, the things we talked about from an application perspective, or new applications that we don't even know about today. And that's really, I think, what's going to be meaningful to consumers. Today, go ahead.
George, we got a comment in the comment section here, and it kind of pertains to what you were just speaking about a moment or two ago, saying, Lindsay saying, I recently bought a 5G phone. Did I invest too soon since it's only effective when I go into the city? She has Verizon. I mean, you're talking about this thing actually kind of really taking off mid 2023. Kind of sounds like her phone, like they've sold us on this idea. Is it worth it to jump in now, or should we just wait?
Well, why do you buy a new phone, right? I mean, I had a bunch of talks on this topic before Christmas, right? Because everybody's getting ready. Do I
Mhm.
want to buy a new iPhone? Do I want to buy this, buy that? There's a lot of reasons to buy a new phone, right? It's not just the enablement of 5G. That's one of the benefits that you're going to get. Depending if you bought a new iPhone or a new Samsung phone, you might get a faster processor. You might get bigger battery, longer battery life. You might get better screens or better
Sure.
cameras.
Okay. Yeah.
Lots of reasons to buy a new phone, and not the least of which is you just want to stay current and have the latest and greatest stuff. That's me, but my kids aren't spending $1,500 on a new phone. They're more concerned about, hey, what am I going to get for it? And they are less concerned today about 5G as they are about better battery life. Do I have a better screen or a better camera? Lots of reasons to buy new devices. Better form factor, right? I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff in these form factors, and we just have to look at what's the thing driving us as individuals. For me, I buy a new phone every year. I've got one of the new foldable phones just because I thought it was cool, and it's got dual SIM, so I operate on two different networks. But would I care if it had 5G or not? Potentially not. That wouldn't be the reason I bought the phone, but it would be a nice feature benefit,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have it built in, so when that does hit, she'll have the phone that's ready for it, right?
Exactly.
And you mentioned earlier also about how some of the companies are focusing on sub 6, and some of them are focusing on the high millimeter. What should we consider when choosing a network? I mean, is 5G going to work the same for me if I'm on T-Mobile versus Verizon?
It's a really good question. And I operate on a couple of different networks, mainly because I'm looking for coverage.
Mhm.
And today, I mean, if you think about 5 years ago, right, you'd be driving down the highway, depending on where you lived. I remember I would go see my folks in East Texas. One network would fade away, another network would would pick up and have greater capability and greater coverage.
Mhm.
So I ended up with a dual SIM phone, one that could go on either or network. I think it depends where you live and what you're looking for. I mean, obviously, if you're living in downtown Chicago, a great choice might be to go with a Verizon phone. If you're living in San Francisco or Seattle, it just depends on who the network operator there that you care a lot about. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't
I'm
think
not,
there's a lot of difference for 90% of what we do today.
okay.
We'll have to see what happens over time. I
Yeah,
just
you brought up an image in my head. I don't know if there was some movie with Tom Cruise where they were getting land, some like in Ireland or something like that, and they all had their horses in their carriage, and they just waved a flag, and everybody just took off, and we had to plant a flag to this
oh
is my
yes.
land. I envisioned T-Mobile and Verizon and these just trying to score as many areas in his land as they can to be like, if you're in Chicago, Verizon's the one for you, type of deal. Is that kind of how it's going?
I think it really depends on where you live, quite frankly. And
Okay.
yeah, everybody's got a foothold. It just so happens that happens to be the foothold that Verizon has. They talk about it a lot. I
Yeah.
mean, they've got great nationwide coverage, right?
Mhm.
They talk about 5G. I mean, some of their commercials are specific about the applications that they enable there. Does that not mean that they don't have great coverage everywhere? They got great coverage everywhere. I don't think you can go wrong with any of the major network
Okay.
operators
Okay.
today.
Well, it's just a question that
For
consumers have. Like, I mean, they want the best out of this, so they want to know who to go with.
Yeah, and I here's what I would tell you about that. I don't think that decision today is 5G based. Could it be 3 or 4 years from now? Yeah, it could be. I
Okay.
think today you want to live, if you live in a rural area, you want to look at the operator that provides you the best coverage in the area you live in. If you're out in Tyler, Texas, which is where I used to go, and have no coverage with one operator and another operator had great coverage, my folks had that, operator is their provider. I happen to have a different one. So when I went out there, I was using a landline, right? So today, I think it's more about where you live and who offers the best coverage in the area you live in.
All right. Well, George, thank you for the explanation of what 5G is. It's good to know that it's more like a mesh network, a lot of little transmitters with a shorter range, but of course a much higher bandwidth for your speed for your phone and all that, and helping us kind of walk through the process of Why should we buy now? Should we wait? Why are people buying phones? But you did say, and we'll wrap up with this. You did say at the top of this interview, there's some really cool technology. I mean, I hate to go back into the hype because I've been hyped up for a year and a half, but talk about maybe one or two of these technologies that are 5G specific. They can't be done with a 4G LTE or anything less than that. That has to be a 5G network to pull off these crazy real life technologies. Is there one or two out there that, besides downloading a quick movie, that you're really excited about?
Well, it depends. It depends if you've got 8 or 10-year-old kids. That may be the most important
I
thing
do. I do.
too. I know when I did, that would have been awesome, and I would have
Yeah,
bought
right.
anything to make that happen. I think what we're seeing, there's obviously gaming on the phone that will be, enabled with virtual and near virtual reality. Some of the work that's being done by some of the major handset guys, and even those that are not in the handset business, it's going to be very, very exciting of what you're able to do. I mean, the technologies that are out there in virtual reality day that will be enabled by these wide pipes is really going to be pretty astonishing. That will be the take you into the future kind of moment where you're putting on a pair of glasses, and instead of having a keyboard and a mouse, you're doing these virtual screens in front of you and typing on a virtual keyboard. I think that's going to be pretty cool stuff, and that will be enabled by this type of technology. Remote surgeries. I mean, you live in a rural area and you want to get the best doctor possible to treat you. That will be enabled by these wide pipes and the low latency applications that will be enabled by 5G. And I think that's going to be, it'll change people's lives fundamentally. And that's really going to be, I think, a game changer, and really only capable when you get these high frequency pipes to the masses, right? So, I mean, clearly, if you are, if money's no object, you can probably solve that problem regardless. But for the rest of us, that's what's going to be important.
I love two things about that. One, there's a new hashtag, wide pipes. Gonna have to use that. And then secondly, you mentioned about how life is going to change. So you just talked about these remote surgeries. Once again, for those who might now just be tuning in, what do you predict is the timeline? Because you said the words that I thought was going to happen a year ago, changing my life fundamentally, right? That big change that everyone notices and went, this is amazing. And this is now life, but that hasn't happened yet. What do you think is the timeline for that fundamental change, for that, oh my word, look what I have in the palm of my hand phone thing?
If I had to call the ball, I think we're going to start seeing real deployments in that area next year.
Okay.
You'll be able to start buying phones at the end of next year that are really truly enabled with lots of the 5G types of components. I mean, you're starting to see it now, obviously, and the hype is there for sure.
Sure.
But I think when you're going to get the kind of performance that we're talking about, I really do think that's probably later next year or the following year till it really starts to get to where it's meaningful to the masses.
Yeah, like the peak performance that you were talking about earlier too, right? I mean, does this have to kind of just has to grow organically until it reaches peak performance, or is
Yeah, I mean it does have to grow organically, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you've got the best phone on the planet. If you don't have network coverage in the area you're trying to use it, you're going to still be on a 4G network. I mean, so the operators have to spend the money necessary to get broad coverage, which is why they're talking about it now, and why they're talking about, hey, you want to be on their network because they've got this great performance. Maybe it's in Chicago, maybe it's in LA, maybe it's wherever. Eventually it'll be everywhere. And and what that eventually is, they're spending lots of money on it right now. I think we're going to see that 22, 23, 24 are going to be kind of a real really, really nice time to be in that, having those next generation phones, because we're going to see that kind of performance.
Cool. I'm going to hop in my autonomous car, download a movie, and then have a remote surgery all in the afternoon, right?
Exactly. Why not?
Hey, George, thank you so much for clearing up a lot of these questions and for explaining to us. We kind of we all know what 5G is. We've heard it, but to have it actually described in detail and to have some hard fact answers of when we can actually expect this big change to happen in everybody's smartphone was really valuable. So I appreciate your time today, George. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a great afternoon.
You too.
See you. There you go, mixers. 5G questions. Hopefully they were answered for you, because let me tell you what, I like you, been hearing those commercials now for years and years, and I keep wondering, when is this going to happen? Well, now you got a better idea. You're probably a year or two out for it to have its full potential to really be realized. So, stick around, and don't forget to check out Resonant Inc. Great company. George, smart man, as you heard. Hop on over to their website, learn more about what they do. We're always doing these Morning Mix socials, so if you want, make sure you log into the Facebook page for the Fox 17 Morning Mix, and you can see a playlist of the previous 10 or 11 of these that we've already put up for you, and more to come. So thanks so much for watching and spending some time on social with me, and we'll see you next time.